In the spring of 447 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire stood on the edge of catastrophe. Under their emperor Theodosius II, the empire had continuously failed to deal with the expanding threat from the east, the Huns. For nearly a decade, the empire had struggled to contain the relentless ambitions of the Hunnic king, Attila. Treaties with the Huns had been broken almost as soon as they were signed. Enormous annual tributes of gold had failed to satisfy the Hunnic king. Attila demanded larger payments, more territory, and complete Roman submission. When the empire hesitated, he prepared for his greatest invasion yet. The Danube frontier, loaded with fertile lands and treasures, was targeted relentlessly by the Huns. Major cities along the Danube had been sacked and pillaged, and the Roman frontier, once the strongest defensive system in Europe, had begun to dissolve. Emperor Theodosius II had little choice but to prepare for war. The coming engagement would culminate on the banks of the Utus River in modern northern Bulgaria. Overall command of the Roman army fell to the Magister Militum Gisclus. He led the army of veterans and newly raised troops to block Attila's advance into Thrace. Recognizing the Huns' superiority in mobility, he chose to make his stand along the Utus River, hoping the terrain would give the Eastern Roman army a fighting chance. The Eastern Roman army consisted of 3 different forces, all combined to form one massive host of about 71,000 troops. The exact location of the battle remains debated by historians. Most agree it took place near the modern Vit River in northern Bulgaria. The landscape consisted of open ground broken by the river itself, gentle hills, and patches of woodland. The plains favored mounted maneuver. Although the open terrain greatly advantaged the Huns' cavalry, the Romans hoped the river would help protect their flank and allow their disciplined troops to hold their formation against Attila's forces. Attila assembled one of the largest armies ever fielded by the Huns. The Hunnic force may have numbered somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 men, though exact figures remain uncertain. The army was far more diverse than many imagine. The Huns themselves formed the elite mounted corps at the rearguard. Ostrogoths, Gepids, Alan, and other steppe tribes made up the corps at the vanguard. On the flanks was more Hunnic cavalry, supported by allied contingents. Each fought in its own style. The Huns excelled as mounted horse archers. The Germanic warriors provided fearsome infantry and heavy cavalry. Together, they formed an extraordinarily flexible army, capable of adapting to almost any battlefield. What happened next is a bit of a mystery that sparks debate among historians, but it would appear that the Romans initiated the battle when their right flank rode forward horizontally towards the Hunnic right flank. Whether given the command by Gisclus is not certain, there is reason to believe that the commander of the cavalry contingents on the Roman right flank acted alone, given the circumstances of their strange maneuver. Roman mounted lancers, as well as heavy cataphracts, galloped across the battlefield, aiming to overwhelm the smaller force of lighter Hunnic auxiliary troops on Attila's right. Attila acted competently, giving the signal for his right flank to retreat. Then he shifted his main body across to prevent the Roman cavalry from giving pursuit. Like a well-disciplined army, the Hunnic allied troops successfully cut off the Roman advance, leaving them with limited options. The Roman cavalry then charged head-on directly toward the enemy infantry line. In hindsight, this was a reckless maneuver. The coherent strategy would have been to rejoin the rest of their army and await further instructions. The situation was reminiscent like at the Battle of Adrianople in 378, when the Eastern Roman right flank, all cavalry, acted in a similar, reckless fashion. Initially, the Roman cataphracts and cavalry contingents inflicted substantial casualties on the enemy infantry with their brazen charge. But what they failed to realize was that they were now tied down in enemy territory and far too distant from their main force to receive timely reinforcements. Attila utilized the situation. His Hunnic cavalry at the rear guard spread out and prepared to encircle the enemy cavalry. Some of the Roman cavalry saw what was happening and managed to escape, but the bulk were completely oblivious and were ensnared. It was a massacre. Whoever didn't escape was cut down to the last man. A horrible start to the battle for Anagisclus and his men. Having won a decisive skirmish, the momentum shifted to Attila's army. They went on the offensive. The Hunnic riders now targeted the Roman left flank. Attila knew that if he could neutralize the Roman cavalry entirely, that their main body of infantry at the center would be left out in the open, utterly defenseless. His Hunnic mounted archers could pick them off from a safe distance with arrows, whilst his allied infantry could surround them and keep them from moving. The Hunnic archers devastated the Roman left flank, cutting down swathes of cavalry. If this onslaught continued on, then the Roman left would be shattered in no time. Recognizing the danger of remaining passive, Anagisclus sent infantry detachments to help reinforce the battered left. The infantry arrived just in the nick of time to provide a much-needed defensive perimeter. Anagisclus simultaneously led a counterattack on Attila's center. The experienced Roman general acknowledged if the Romans were to have any chance of turning this battle around, then their superior infantry would be the key. The numerically superior Eastern legions and allied contingents smashed into the battered enemy Hunnic allied lines, causing them to buckle immediately under the immense pressure. It was now the Romans who gained an upper hand in the battle. Fierce hand-to-hand melee ensued, which favored the Roman troops. For one, they were more fresh than Attila's infantry, who sustained a battering earlier in the day from the Roman cavalry assault. Secondly, they were better armored. Attila's allied troops were either lightly armored or had no armor whatsoever. And lastly, at least half of Attila's force was cavalry, meaning that the Roman infantry significantly outnumbered the enemy infantry on the battlefield. Anagisclus led his infantry from the front lines. They continued to gain more ground as the enemy infantry began buckling under the pressure. Finally, the Romans had the momentum, or so it seemed. Attila then gave the signal for his entire right flank to mount an offensive. His mounted riders rode forth and engaged with the battered Roman troops, and a hectic struggle ensued. Why Attila opted to engage his cavalry was not clear, for his mounted archers were having immense success skirmishing from a safe distance. As an avid strategist, one could assume that his plan all along was to make Arnagisclus and his troops at the center believe they were gaining the upper hand, thus committing fully to the attack whilst being lured in. This was a similar tactic to what Hannibal did to the Romans over 600 years prior at the Battle of Cannae. After a prolonged and hectic struggle, Attila's cavalry had completely decimated the Roman infantry on the left. Instead of engaging Attila's cavalry, however, the Roman cavalry stationed there broke rank and fled in a desperate display of cowardice. Yet another Eastern Roman army would be betrayed by their own cavalry commanders, which is exactly what led to their demise at the Battle of Adrianople. This was a nightmare for the Romans. Their entire left flank was gone. Their center was exposed. Arnagisclus was likely unaware of what had just occurred, as no attempt by him was made to send a portion of his infantry to form a defensive perimeter. Attila's elite Hunnic riders pushed their way through on the Roman right flank, routing them entirely. Whether sheer luck, or whether a complete tactical mastery from Attila, is up for debate. Now the momentum was fully in the favor of the Hunnic general. Arnagisclus's men at the center continued to push onward, gaining more ground and pushing the enemy lines to their breaking point. But by this stage, it no longer mattered. Now the remainder of the Roman force was defenseless from encirclement. The Hunnic allied cavalry swooped in mercilessly. Roman infantry turned in horror as the realization had finally hit them. They were trapped, with nowhere to go. Arnagisclus and his men fought valiantly to the end, but it was futile. An entire Roman army had been wiped out. Casualties are not known to the exact number, but we can concur that tens of thousands fell, mostly from the Roman army. After his victory at the Utus, Attila swept through the Balkans with little resistance, capturing and devastating major cities, including Nisus, Serdica, Philippopolis, and Marcianopolis. The campaign left widespread destruction, depopulated entire regions, disrupted trade, and caused damage from which the Eastern Roman territories took generations to recover. Attila would continue to go on to terrorize both the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire for years to come.